Yes, Senator?
Things have gone to shit at Armacam.
What do you want me to do, sir?
What you're good at, Morrison.
You may not like the consequences.
Perseus is mine. Get it back. I don't care what you have to do.
We're in.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Let's Talk About series. And for today's episode, we actually have something really special. Mainly because this is the first Halloween special, which is funny because this is only the second episode. Today I will be talking about the final expansion for the original F.E.A.R, this one being known as F.E.A.R Perseus Mandate. Now, this one is way more action-oriented, though there is still a bit of a loose horror sense, especially towards the end of the expansion, when you get to the Perseus compound. Anyway, I'll be talking about the same things as I did in the last Let's Talk About video. I'll be going over the new weapons, the new enemies, and of course, an extensive look into the plot, because this one's a little bit weird. For now, I want to talk about the new gun types, because Perseus Mandate added 3 new different guns, which one of them sucks, one of them is decent, and then one of them can literally carry you throughout the entire goddamn game, especially considering you can get a little bit of ammo for it throughout the later chapters. So starting off, for the first new weapon we have, it is the K3 BT grenade launcher. And I talked about this in the extraction point video. This grenade launcher, it's a piece of shit, and I don't like it. Mainly because the grenades bounce everywhere, and you have more of a chance of killing yourself with it than you do an enemy. And what's fucked up is that they give an enemy this weapon in like the first portion of the game, and that enemy is a heavy armored replica. You know, one of the tankiest enemies in game. So you have a near invincible mini-boss enemy type that is now armed with a pretty much an insta-kill contact grenade launcher. You could see why I considered this thing to be a major piece of shit. Onto a less major piece of shit, but still kinda bad, we have the VES Advanced Rifle. Now these, honestly, these kinda just look like a hunk of metal, though they still have a pretty unique looking design compared to the G2A2 and the RPL. The VES Advanced Rifle is the new assault rifle dropped by the Nightcrawlers, a new faction introduced only in Perseus Mandate. The VES Advanced Rifle has a scope, which is considered night vision despite it being red, and I've seen a lot of people say that they don't like this. I, for one, am not bothered by it, because most of the time it is able to highlight enemies in dark areas, which is pretty cool. The weapon also does moderate damage. It may or may not do more than the G2A2, and I think it might be a little bit more accurate than the G2A2 as well. Onto the third and final new gun, we have the LP4L Lightning Arc. This weapon is the most powerful gun in F.E.A.R. It can insta-kill an enemy, and if it doesn't insta-kill an enemy, it will wound them so severely that a pistol shot can take them out. And it can also chain through targets. So say you shoot one guy and he has 2 buddies behind him, it will chain onto them, weakening them. Meaning one VK-12 combat shotgun blast will usually take them out instantly. And the funny thing about this is that this Lightning Arc gun has one of the coolest designs, mainly because it's an energy-based weapon. Now, F.E.A.R's a pretty futuristic series, considering what happens in the third and second games. But I think these guns mesh really well in between semi-futuristic normal firearms and then semi-futuristic futuristic weapons. And these weapons do actually do pretty good against the new ghost enemies. I will get into them in a few moments. For the first enemy type that I'll go over, I'm just gonna go instantly into the supernatural. Perseus Mandate only has one new ghost enemy, and that is in the form of the Scarecrow. They're pretty much these weird looking, smiley-faced motherfuckers that will hide in these burning dark patches on the ground, and even under piles of bodies and blood. They will jump out at you and will drag you into their hole, which, from the embers and the heat coming up, it's kind of like they're dragging you into hell. They're easy to kill, usually one shotgun blast to the face will destroy it, and the lightning arc can actually be used to pretty much insta-kill them without even going near their pit. This is why I consider them to be one of the weaker ghost enemies. What isn't weak, however, are the new soldier enemies. Not only do the ATC security guards from the regular F.E.A.R return, but we also have armored ATC security, which looks like modified SWAT armor, and the replica, who are pretty much the same. They even have the Rev 8 Leviathans and all of the other goofy toys now. Plus the extraction point enemies and DLCs return, so that's an added obstacle. But we now have an entire new faction in the form of the Nightcrawlers. The Nightcrawlers are pretty much just a huge mercenary force made up of guys that are dressed in black and red uniforms. There are 3 subtypes of Nightcrawler soldiers and then the commander. The regular Nightcrawler soldier just looks like a replica but with a black helmet with red eyes. The Nightcrawler heavy soldiers, they actually have quite a different design. Completely different mask and goggles. The Nightcrawler elites are simply wearing a mask that goes up to their nose and red goggles, and they have the ability to use slow-mo as well, which is a detriment on higher difficulties. And the final Nightcrawler is the Nightcrawler Commander. He's the only one of any significance because, well, he clearly has some history with F.E.A.R, as evidenced by the fact that he directly calls us out during his boss fight. And that's pretty much all the new enemies. The Nightcrawlers are competent, but even then they are shown to be wiped out pretty easily by the ghosts when they get to the Perseus compound. Before I go over Perseus Mandate, I want to go over the 3 new main characters. I say main characters, but they're more or less just the squad that we follow. I'll start off with our playable character, who is simply named Sergeant. He has no other name than that, and hell, you don't even get to see what he looks like. But he does have an actual face model. The Sergeant also seems to have the same slow-mo ability as the Point Man, which, if you're wondering how that is, yeah, keep fucking wondering. I'm still trying to figure out why, too. And for the rest of the second F.E.A.R team, we have Steve Chen, who is the obligatory badass of the group, just to get killed off later on, but that's neither here or there. And David Rains, who is voiced by, you guessed it, Steve Blum. I mean, are you surprised? He was everywhere. He still is everywhere. The game begins sometime during the later stages of the original F.E.A.R. By this point, the Point Man has already begun his journey towards the origin facility. However, we pick up in the shoes of the second F.E.A.R team, made up of the characters that I've already mentioned. Rodney Betters, our coordinator, has already planned on dropping us somewhere near an ATC data center, where we have to collect any and all mention of the name Perseus. What is Perseus? Well, we'll get into that in the way later chapters of the story.
They're supposed to be on our side. Didn't ATC call us in to help them in the first place?
What's ATC hiding?
We don't know yet. Your mission is to secure Armicam's Global Data and Security Center and retrieve any information related to a project codenamed Perseus.
Paxton Fettel and his army of replicas?
That may just be the tip of the iceberg. SAT images have picked up enemy activity near the landing zone, so be careful. Head directly to ATC's data center once you're on the ground. As always, I'll be in radio contact with you throughout the mission. Begin your jump prep.
Time to fly.
Landing on the ground, you and your team come face to face with a small sector of replica who have already taken out many of the Delta Force that were trying to defend the outer areas of Auburn. Making your way through the canal section of the city, you fight your way to a treatment plant, where you come across several replica assassins. And don't worry, these guys only appear a few times throughout this DLC. After dealing with the replica assassins and the replica in the treatment facility, the sergeant ends up getting separated from Chen and Rains and has to go on through a underground sewer area, where he encounters his first sighting of the Nightcrawler faction. One from an elite attempting to kill him with a knife, and the other being a soldier dumping a few corpses into the sewer. With this, the sergeant continues on fighting for more replica before he is finally able to emerge on the street level, where he comes into contact with ATC security forces in the middle of a guerrilla war against the replica and secretly the Nightcrawlers who have already infiltrated the data center. Getting into the data center and clearing out what few replica are in it, the sergeant and the others discover the Nightcrawlers, who finally make themselves known, attacking Chen and Rains and having an elite attack the sergeant. With being separated again from his own team, the sergeant continues his way throughout the ATC data center, encountering copious amounts of dead scientists and researchers, all killed by the Nightcrawlers, apparently as a way to cover their tracks. Chen even identifies Alma, having witnessed her spirit somewhere in the building, already identifying that he has been chosen. With this, the sergeant actually does encounter the spirit of Alma, who is killing a couple Nightcrawlers, and inadvertently blasts the sergeant out of a window. Waking up and being relatively okay after his encounter with Alma, the sergeant and his team are picked up by Delta Force and flown out to an Armicam genetic databank, where Paxton Fettel's DNA sample is held. Here they help Delta Force fight through a combination of the replica and ATC's forces, while the sergeant goes after a man named Grant Morrison, who is in league with the Nightcrawlers and a mysterious senator. This senator actually being one of the biggest antagonists of the F.E.A.R series, despite only appearing briefly at the end of Perseus' mandate, and only ever being heard over the phone in both this expansion and the original F.E.A.R, as he was just completely forgotten by Monolith during F.E.A.R 2, I guess. Managing to catch up with Morrison, the sergeant and Chen, being on the same level as him, go to arrest him. However, at this time, the Point Man had managed to escape the Origin facility and make it above ground, where the Origin facility explodes. The characters witness this, offer Morrison to escape through a tunnel system and lock the door behind him. Chen is able to get the door open in time, and he and the sergeant make it underground, while Rains is not so lucky.
Son of a bitch.
Picking up a few hours later after the explosion, Chen and the sergeant make their way through the underground catacombs of Fairport, where they uncover dozens of signs that something isn't right, including the infamous bloody A, which signifies an area that is under heavy paranormal infestation. Chen and the sergeant encounter dozens of hallucinations and include a small battle with the Shades, which Chen doesn't really comment on. It all comes to a conclusion when Chen is ultimately dragged into a floor and killed by a scarecrow, leaving the sergeant all alone. And this part is actually where I think the horror of Extraction Point fully plays into Perseus' mandate. Now alone, the sergeant makes his way through the underground sections, fighting off dozens of horrifying specters before catching a glimpse of Morrison, who managed to survive on his own despite being surrounded by deadly paranormal activity. Catching up with Morrison much later, the sergeant finds that he has been locked in a cage, simply because the Nightcrawler commander and the Nightcrawler forces have grown tired of losing their own men to a bunch of near unkillable beasts. Morrison, however, is able to play his cards right and gets the F.E.A.R team to help him escape Nightcrawler custody, telling them that he'll lead them to a service tunnel straight to Still Island. Making it to the underground service tunnels that lead to the Still Island complex as well as the Perseus compound, both the sergeant and Morrison are able to see a hallucination caused by Alma.
She had been dead for 3 years when she first came for me. She destroyed them with the raw edge of her pain.
Immediately after, Morrison is killed by one of Alma's psychic outbursts, which sends a replica truck hurtling towards him and skids him into a paste. Now truly alone, since Rains isn't on the island and is actually trying to get there, either via boat or a stolen helicopter, the sergeant fights his way throughout the Perseus compound, uncovering hundreds of decaying corpses of Armacham personnel that were left there, as well as the still incubating clones of replica soldiers which look downright horrific. Making it to the vault where Alma's DNA is, Paxton Fettel and the army of Shades that he obviously commands, seeing as how he is the one that summons them there, attack and decimate the Nightcrawler's remaining forces. However, the commander is able to evade them and the sergeant, as well as killing dozens of replica who have arrived on the island. Here, the sergeant has his final battle against the Nightcrawlers, and is able to successfully destroy them, the remaining elites, and the commander, before making it to the surface, where he meets up with Rains, fights off the last remaining bit of replica forces on the island, and is able to escape on a Delta Force helicopter, making him and Rains the only protagonists to successfully escape Fairport. And with this, Perseus' mandate comes to an end. The last thing the sergeant sees in any way paranormal is the spirit of Chen, who is now at peace and fades away. And I gotta say, Perseus' mandate ain't that bad. While way more action-oriented, I'd say after the Origin facility explosion, the game gets a little bit spooky. It goes back to being what F.E.A.R is, part shooter, part horror, even if the horror isn't entirely there. I'd say the Perseus compound section carries the horror, mainly because the implications that hundreds of employees were just left there by Armacham and were slowly picked off by the replica soldiers, and a very pissed off Alma. Well, this has been Let's Talk About Episode 2 and the Halloween special. I managed to tackle both of the expansions for F.E.A.R before I actually talked about F.E.A.R. though I promise, dear viewers, that a F.E.A.R video may be in the near future.